Welcome back. Let's understand how we can set up REST services response over listener connector dynamically in this video. In previous video, we have hard-coded the response section in body and also for the status code and reason phrase. Basically, in real time, we never hard-code these values in the HTTP listener responses section, whereas we supply these values dynamically. We usually set up body through payload and status codes through variables. So the MuleSoft behavior is right. In the end of the flow, whatever we will have in the payload, if we set up as payload here, that will be responded back in the response body. Suppose assume here we are making a database call, right? And after the database call, if I set up a payload, so for that we can go for set payload, drag and drop a set payload. Here we can see this line. So this line is going back to the HTTP listener. Once the execution completed, the set payload will be available to this listener. So in the set payload, I can say this as success, save. Since the payload is available in the end as success, right? So the payload I can configure under the listener responses section for the body. So here I can map this as payload so that the value available in the payload at the end of the flow will be injected dynamically through body. In similar way, let me create a set variable to create status code. So let's take this as status code and value as 200. Let's save it. Let me also drag and drop one more variable to set up the reason phrase. So let me take this as HTTP reason and let me keep value as OK. Let's save it. And if we inject these variables dynamically in the listener, right, those will be sent dynamically because we look at the flow processing here. We see this line after execution of all these connectors. Again, the execution will go back to the listener. From there, these responses will be initialized. So under responses, now I can map the status code as vars.status code and reason phrase as vars dot, let me get this variable name, and we can map in the reason phrase section. Let's save it. For now, let me delete this database call. We no longer required it. Let the application get redeployed. The application has deployed. Let's go ahead and make the request. Request came. Say next, next, and we look at payload, right? We have it as success. If I say next, we see a variable created as 200. And if I say next, these variables and payload will go back to the listener section, and under responses, those payload and variables can be set up in the response section. And we look at the response, right? We see it as success 200 OK. Let me change this payload to something else, something as success response. Let's save it. Application has deployed. Let me make the request. Request came. Say next, next, and the payload as initialized as success response. Say next, and we see a variable created, and next another variable will be created. If I say next, we can see it as success response 200 OK. So this way we usually set up the HTTP response body, status code, reason phrase dynamically in the Mule flow. And that's all about this session. Thank you. Happy learning.